Madrid, 28th of May, 1980. Brian Clough stands just one match away from another European Cup. Nottingham Forest are ready to make history. The players are prepared. The supporters are dreaming. Then you notice one name is missing. Stan Bowles. Not injured, not suspended. One of England's most gifted footballers simply isn't there. Only months earlier, Clough believed he had signed a genius. Instead, the relationship collapsed before Forest's greatest night. No public showdown, no emotional goodbye, only silence. And one haunting question. How did the manager who transformed so many careers completely lose Stan Bowles? This was never just about football. It became a battle over control. Clough believed every player had to serve the team. Bowles believed football could never be controlled. Neither man would change. Only one walked away. When Forest conquered Europe once again, Brian Clough lifted the trophy. Stan Bowles became the greatest missing man of the night, and that is where this story begins. Before we uncover the tragic truth about Brian Clough and Stan Bowles, subscribe for more forgotten football stories, legendary rivalries, and the moments that shaped the game's greatest names. When Stan Bowles arrived at Nottingham Forest in December 1979, many believed Brian Clough had just signed one of England's greatest football entertainers. At Queen's Park Rangers, Bowles had been the man supporters came to watch. He played with freedom, instinct, and imagination. But by the time Forest came calling, his relationship with Tommy Docherty had already collapsed. Bowles arrived carrying something more dangerous than disappointment. He arrived carrying pride. The problem was, Nottingham Forest were not waiting for someone to rescue them. They were already champions of Europe. Brian Clough had already built his empire. John Robertson was the creative heartbeat. Trevor Francis was Britain's first £1 million footballer. Every player knew his place. Every player understood one rule. Brian Clough came first. Stan Bowles walked into that dressing room, believing his talent would speak for itself. Brian Clough believed talent meant nothing without complete trust. From the very beginning, the two men wanted different things. Bowles wanted the freedom that had made him famous. Clough wanted another player willing to serve the team. Neither realized they had already stepped into a battle that neither would ever win. The warning came almost immediately. According to a story Stan Bowles later shared, Brian Clough looked at his new signing and acted as though he barely knew who he was. Then came the instruction. Simple, cold, brutal. Win the ball and give it to John Robertson. To most players, it would have sounded like ordinary advice. To Stan Bowles, it sounded like a demotion. At QPR, he had been the man everything flowed through. At Nottingham Forest, he was being told someone else mattered more. That someone was John Robertson, Forest's quiet genius. Brian Clough trusted Robertson completely, not because he scored the most goals, but because he always played for the team. Bowles saw football differently. He believed the best moments came from instinct, not instructions. The more Clough tried to shape his game, the more Bowles felt he was losing the very football that had made him special. It wasn't about one pass or one training session. It was about identity. Clough wanted another piece in a championship machine. Bowles never wanted to become just another piece. From that moment, every conversation, every tactical decision, and every team selection became another test of who would give in first. Neither man ever did. Brian Clough had rebuilt difficult footballers before. John Robertson, Larry Lloyd, Kenny Burns. Players other clubs had doubted became champions under him. That is why Stan Bowles was different. Clough did not hate gifted players. He hated gifted players he could not trust. Bowles never believed football should be controlled. Years later, he admitted managers could give him instructions before a match, but once the whistle blew, he played what he saw. That was the football he believed in. Clough believed the opposite. Freedom won matches. Discipline won trophies. Forest had conquered Europe because every player accepted that idea. Bowles couldn't. Clough even tried using him in a different role. Less freedom, more responsibility, more work for the team. Bowles saw it as taking away the very qualities that had made him one of England's finest entertainers. Neither man was completely wrong. Clough was protecting a team that had already reached the top of Europe. Bowles was protecting the footballing identity that had made supporters fall in love with him. That is why this story was never about arrogance or ego. It was about two completely different beliefs. One man believed football belonged to the manager. The other believed it belonged to the player, brave enough to ignore the script. Soon, the disagreement stopped being tactical. It became personal. At first, the disagreement stayed behind closed doors, training sessions, team meetings, small moments most supporters never saw, but they kept growing. Brian Clough's greatest strength had always been psychological control. He could build confidence. He could destroy it. He knew exactly which words to use, to make players follow him. Stan Bowles was different. The more Clough pushed, the more Bowles resisted. It reached the point where Clough dropped him from the side. Then something even stranger happened. Bowles later revealed, the two men stopped speaking directly. If Clough had something to say, it came through someone else, not from the manager himself. The relationship had become that broken. Bowles remained closer to Peter Taylor. Taylor understood his personality. Clough no longer wanted to. There were stories of Clough testing players, embarrassing them, even mocking them. Most accepted it, because they trusted where it would lead. Bowles didn't. To him, respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned. The dressing room slowly divided into two worlds. Players who completely believed in Brian Clough, and one football genius, who no longer believed Brian Clough believed in him. By then, the ending was no longer a question of if, only when. The tragedy is, Stan Bowles wasn't failing. Not completely. He had already shown he could perform on Europe's biggest stage. He played as Forest defeated Barcelona to lift the European Super Cup. Camp Nou didn't frighten him. Big occasions never had. The ability was still there. That was never Brian Clough's biggest concern. Trust was. Forest weren't looking for moments of brilliance. They wanted certainty, discipline, reliability. Bowles offered something different. The unexpected. The pass nobody else could see. The dribble nobody else would even attempt. Supporters loved that freedom. Managers feared it. Every week, Clough faced the same question. Could he trust Stan Bowles when everything was on the line? Each time, the answer became less convincing. Slowly, Bowles found himself further away from the team, further away from Clough, and further away from the place he believed he deserved. The cruel part, he was close enough to see history being written, but never close enough to become part of it himself. Then came the moment. Stan Bowles never truly forgot. John Robertson wasn't just a teammate. He was Bowles's closest friend at Nottingham Forest. So when Robertson's testimonial arrived, Bowles expected to be part of it. He wasn't. Brian Clough left him out. To many people, it sounded insignificant. Just a testimonial. Just one match. Even Bowles later admitted, it probably sounded foolish to everyone else. But not to him, because by then, it wasn't really about the testimonial anymore. It was about everything that had happened before, being moved into a different role, being dropped, being ignored, speaking to the manager through other people. Now, being left out of his closest friend's special day. For Bowles, it felt like one message: you no longer belong here. Months of frustration finally became personal. The trust had gone. The respect had gone. And whatever chance remained of repairing the relationship disappeared with it. From that moment, walking away no longer felt impossible. It began to feel inevitable. The biggest match in European club football was only days away. Nottingham Forest were preparing to defend the European Cup. Most players would have accepted almost any role just to be there. Stan Bowles couldn't. By this stage, the relationship with Brian Clough had already broken beyond repair. Bowles made his decision. He walked away. Years later, he believed he had also walked away from a European Cup medal. Whether Brian Clough would have started him, no one can say for certain. But Bowles made sure he would never find out. It was the final act, in a battle that had lasted for months. Clough refused to bend. Bowles refused to surrender. Only one choice remained. Forest travelled to Madrid without him. Brian Clough kept the authority that had built champions. Stan Bowles kept the pride that had defined his career. But pride has a price, and Stan Bowles was about to pay it. On the greatest night Nottingham Forest had ever known, 28th of May, 1980, the Santiago Bernabeu, Nottingham Forest faced Hamburg. 90 minutes separated Brian Clough from football history. Then came the moment. John Robertson picked up the ball, cut inside, and calmly placed his shot beyond the goalkeeper. 1 goal. 1 European Cup. Forest were champions of Europe. Again. Brian Clough had proved his methods worked. His discipline, his authority, his belief that the team always came first. But while the celebrations began, one man was missing from every photograph. Stan Bowles. The footballer Clough had once believed could strengthen his champions, never witnessed their greatest night from inside the squad. Football can be cruel. The player Bowles admired most at Forest, John Robertson, became the hero of the very final Bowles had walked away from. So who was right? Brian Clough or Stan Bowles? The answer isn't simple. Clough protected a team that conquered Europe twice. Bowles protected the footballer he refused to stop being. Neither man betrayed his beliefs. But only one belief ended with another European Cup. Perhaps that is why this story still matters. It wasn't really about tactics or team selection. It was about 2 extraordinary football minds who saw the game in completely different ways. Brian Clough refused to surrender his authority. Stan Bowles refused to surrender his freedom. Neither man ever changed. And in the end, one became a 2-time European Cup winning manager. The other became the greatest missing man from Forest's finest night. If you love the untold stories behind football's greatest legends, subscribe now, because the next forgotten story might change the way you see football forever.